hello.
We're back again.
He's Shabazz.
He's Pete Marshall, and this is Script Chat UK. And today we have a guest, and that guest is going to now introduce themselves to you. Over to you, guest.
Hello, I'm Guest, better known as Simon Startin. I'm the artistic director of Vital Exposure, a disabled-led theatre company specialising in work around social justice, amongst other things.
I mean, I think a start of this would be, do you want to give us a history of Vital Exposure and kind of when you started working with them? And
okay, well, my history of Vital Exposure is very short because I started at the beginning of this year. So I'm brand spanking new, and that's fun. Vital Exposure was founded by Julie McNamara in 2010 as a vehicle, essentially initially as a vehicle for her work, which was centered around disabled-led work and social justice already. And it was just a framework for her to carry on that work within the framework that the Arts Council wanted to put her in at that time. But now it's going to become something perhaps a little more strategic and wider, maybe. I don't know.
I just wondered, what attracted you to this particular role?
I've been disabled. I'm disabled. I have been working as an activist and an artist now for 28 years. And it's been around work around getting disabled people into mainstream spaces in theatre, in terms of theatre making. It's been about investigating the possibilities in what I call the disabled aesthetic, which is moments in theatre which only disabled people can do, and which inform the metaphorical and narrative form of the piece. So I'm interested in that, and this VX job is, I can't think of a better home for me, really. It's the best place I could end up at this moment in my career.
Yeah.
I don't even want to call it a career. What am I talking about? I mean, it's a jumble of opportunities cobbled together over time.
I mean, that's an interesting phrase, the disabled aesthetic. Like, what are your favorite examples of that?
Okay, I'll give you a good example. When I first, I'm going to lay claim to inventing this phrase back in, when was it? 1993, I think it was. And I was doing a production with Grey Eye, and Paula Garfield was in the production as an actor, and it was production of Ubu by Alfred Jarry, which is an absurdist kind of Monty Python-esque romp through tyranny. And we were doing this piece, and it was, at the time, it was quite a seminal piece. It was very provocational. It was disabled people behaving very, very badly, and that hadn't really been done before in a theatre space. At least I'm sure it happened many times down the pub. But it was kind of that. And there was a moment where Ubu in the show talked to his conscience. And Ubu didn't really behave. He was like a Trump or a Mussolini or a Hitler. He didn't really act as if he had a conscience. But these peasants were begging for their lives in front of him. And they said, "We appeal to your conscience." And for once in his life went, "Oh, yeah, all right, I will." And he summons his conscience out of the pram of one of the peasants, which is Paula, who is dressed in white, and gave this beautiful speech about the nobility of mercy and how justice is a balance, and all this beautiful voiced over in Shakespearean iambic pentameter, but performed by Paula in BSL. And BSL couldn't be a better embodiment of your conscience on stage. I've never seen anything better in terms of that. And that is a disability aesthetic. It's not a disabled aesthetic. within the social model, but it is a disability aesthetic, and it's beautiful.
I mean,
And those moments are special. So a lot of disabled work comes from the angle of inclusion, and says we want to be included. We want to look at us. We can do it too. I'm less interested in that. I'm more interested in saying, look at us. We can do things better. Or look at us, and then we'll tell you about this thing, which is even more interesting than what we are. And that kind of informs my approach, really.
I mean, how has your ideas around the disability aesthetic kind of bled into your work around Shakespeare and the Royal Shakespeare Company?
Okay. Well, that's first of all, I kind of felt that it was I was responding to a piece. I got a publication from the RSC to say, what can disabled people do for Shakespeare? And I kind of went, in my head, I went, well, it's obvious, isn't it? But obviously it wasn't. So I went and answered that question in a form of an R&D at the RSC around Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, Midsummer Night's Dream is very often portrayed as a kind of Victorian fairy romp, a romantic idyll. I mean, it's been revised a few times in other ways, but actually it's about down and dirty nature and how it doesn't care about us, runs roughshod over us, plays with us, laughs at us, kills us, gives birth to us, a whole cycle of life. And I just thought, I initially came from the idea of the fairies being disabled people, and that they are an embodiment of nature at its most playful and cheeky and naughty and downright nasty sometimes. And so I took that notion of what disabled people represent to able-bodied culture and threw it in their faces with a cultural icon of Shakespeare, and tried to make that sing. And it did really sing very well. I'd love to actually put that production on one day, because it works so well. It even goes back to even if you want to get really poncy about it, the oldest religion in the world is the Earth Mother Goddess religion, which Shakespeare was obsessed with this idea as well, in which there's a myth in that, which is the Mother Goddess gives birth to a son and ejects him from her, and he goes into the world, and then she falls in love with him and he rejects her, and so she in turn gives birth to a boar, a pig, and this is in one of Shakespeare's poems, Venus and Adonis, gives birth to a boar, which then goes and kills her son, and then he subsumes back into her body. And that is one of the oldest myths in existence. And that is essentially, I kind of view disabled people as people who have been given birth into life, attacked by the boar, but survived and live on for a little bit before we eventually, obviously, inevitably die back into the thing. So there's a mythic quality to disability, which is quite intriguing in terms of a Shakespearean sense.
I mean, in the Shakespeare, there's an even tighter link, because if you think about the very notion of the Fae in Shakespeare's time, and this was less true in cities, but certainly very true in where Shakespeare came from, in the countryside, where there's this entire word called like Fae shot and Fae touched. And basically, like, part of that was a whole range of disabilities around intellectual disabilities, autism, like, and basically, like, they believed they were fairy children.
Yeah.
And they, so they were,
so that's a bang on the money for that kind of representation, isn't it? It's kind of, again, they can't be human. They have to be othered by a stamp of magic, or the goddess of whatever inside. So yes, it's this kind of story has gone on since the birth of humanity. we're trying to break away from it now. But whether
Could
we will,
I,
don't know.
sorry, could I ask you about writing and writing disabled characters?
Yeah,
What do you think there's a particular skill to that, or not?
aside from well, you've got to know what it's like. You've got either through research or lived experience, and I kind of think they can equally be as good, because if you have lived experience but can't express that lived experience, that's no good. But if you haven't done the research and you're a brilliant writer, that's no good. But the combination of those two can mean, yeah, because a character at the heart is just it's a construction, but it's a creation of someone with a drive to achieve something and with obstacles in the way of them.
Yeah.
And that can be a disabled person, and that can be an able-bodied person, that can be anybody. That's the whole beauty of a character. It's that drive and that need to achieve something which makes a character come to life. So in that basic way, no, there's no difference at all. But in terms of the life of a disabled person and how they exist in the world and what they experience, that's probably needs a lot of knowledge to do that. But then again, I don't know what it was like to be a disabled person in Victorian England or Mesopotamian Iraq 4,000 years ago, and you might want to write about that, and that might require a leap of imagination and faith. So writing is always a leap from the facts into the world of imagination, if that makes sense.
And going back to the start of your career as an actor, how have things changed from then to now, do you think? Or have they changed at all?
I think there's been I'm going to be positive for once in my life. I think there is a real sea change in terms of disabled actors, and it's occurring now. It's ongoing within the theatre, within television, film. It's not enough. There's still work to do, but people are starting to get it now. They're starting to realise that we're not just, if we are employed, it's not just about playing some stupid able-bodied fantasy of what a disabled person's about, and that we can actually exist in the world in other ways, and we can play many parts and reinterpret the roles which perhaps have previously been played by disabled, able-bodied people, or as I like to call them, enabled people. Then that's interesting and fascinating, and I think there's much more of an appetite. And to be technical about it at the moment, in terms of from the perspective of running a company, the Arts Council have a new strategy called Let's Create, of which inclusion is very much at the center of their work, and it's a criteria by which all companies are going to be judged by as to whether they get money. So finally, money has joined the hands of inclusion, and I think that's going to produce a lot of good results for disabled people. When I started, well, I remember auditioning for drama school, and I auditioned for 3 drama schools. And you can't tell on the podcast, but my disability, my impairment is I've got a thing called distal arthrogryposis, which basically is I've got kind of an unusual body, but it's fairly ambulant, and it doesn't impact me as much as if I was in a wheelchair or something like that. It's more an aesthetic disability in terms of being an actor. And they the drama studio, I'm quite happy to name names, it was a long time ago, said they took me aside and said, we would definitely give you a place if you weren't disabled, but you are, so drama school isn't for you.
They actually said that?
Oh yeah, those were the days.
That's ridiculous. Fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. But bear in mind, no one had considered the idea that disabled people could be on stage. I mean, there was Nabil Shaban who founded Grey Eye, and he was
Yeah.
a real big inspiration for me in terms of thinking it was possible. But yeah, it was allowed to be said, and it was fine. The other one, East 15, said we definitely offered me a place, but I had to get sort of cured before I arrived, and they thought I would if I had lashings of a thing called Alexander technique, then I would no longer be disabled and acceptable to their drama school's aesthetic. And the Welsh College of Music and Drama who let me in, and that was fine. And I remember also I heard a rumor as I was leaving drama school. It was apparently going through the whole drama school. I don't know who started it. I've no idea, but that I'd had a car accident 2 weeks before I'd gone to drama school, and they had but they had already offered me a place, that they had to let me in, and that's why I was there.
So they couldn't imagine like them letting in a disabled person, so they basically came up with fake news about how.
And I went, what? How? Who? What? When did that happen? I mean, at some point, some wicked person made it up, which is even more interesting. I'm kind of a deep admiration for them and their.
On a weird level, it's got a failure of imagination and a lot of imagination at the same time.
Yeah, it has. Yes, in order to actually do the legitimate work of proper imagination, they go all around the houses to invent a news story which doesn't acknowledge the truth. So yeah, they are to be admired and pitied in equal measure.
At the same time. Yeah, I don't know if you saw it, so if you didn't, please let me know. But did you see the show on BBC, the BBC called Crypt Tales?
I've seen some of them. Yes, I haven't seen all of them. Yeah.
The only reason I bring that up is I thought they were okay, but I thought they were largely monologues, like theatre monologues.
Yes, they were. What would you like to have seen then? A more developed
I would have
script?
liked to have seen them as like actual shorts, like proper short stories, rather than. For me, it felt like it was another token gesture of inclusion.
Yeah. Well, what does a legitimate gesture and a token gesture look like from the outside? I'm not sure. Yeah, there was obviously not a lot of money spent on it.
No.
In terms of their things, there was a lot of, I think, money invested in the writers and getting those monologues done, and it was a great opportunity for disabled writers as well as disabled actors. It was modelled, I suppose, on Alan Bennett's Talking Heads, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, and that's good television, and it creates a good opportunity for writers of the theatre. And let's face it, there aren't many disabled writers who have had experience in television and could actually bring about a full-fledged script. No, I might be doing that. Might be wrong. There might be plenty, and I just don't know that. Apart from Jack Thorne, who works everywhere and is great, but it cut its cloth according to what it was, resources it was given, and whether it was tokenistic, I don't think it was. Certainly, Matt Fraser, who was running it, wasn't tokenistic to him at all.
No.
And whether it was tokenistic to the people above, I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting thing that happens to disabled artists all the time. I call it the do 'em and dump 'em model, which is we do them and then we dump them.
Yeah.
And so those artists will probably not get from that initial thing. I'd like to think they would then get, perhaps, as you say, a more fully rounded dramatic opportunity to express their writing than just a monologue to camera, and then you start writing regularly for write a series, write Line of Duty, whatever it is. But I suspect that may not happen. I think it would.
Apparently, I don't know if this is actually going to come off, but apparently, the show The A Word, they're doing a spin-off of that with
Are they?
the two disabled characters, and they're going to get disabled writers to help write it. So we'll wait and see how that works out.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. It's good.
Yeah,
I hope
but
it is. I hope it is.
what
The
I was
disabled
gonna
actors
say-
are cropping up all over the place in
Hmm.
various places, aren't they? That is happening.
I mean,
But
do
there's
you
al-
want?
Go on.
Sorry, do you want to talk about kind of about about some of the common pitfalls that I think non-disabled actors get into when they try and play disabled roles, and kind of how they could avoid those?
How they could avoid them.
Well, in some ways, we don't want to
Don't want to
tell
give
them
them
that
the
they can.
encouragement, do we?
Yes, but I think in terms of improving people's ability to go, well, is this a good Is this a good act? Is this a good version of a disabled character?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the main problems in an enabled, I'm going to keep banging this phrase out, an enabled performance is that their energy goes into the transformation instead of the empathy. So they put a lot of energy into their, like Daniel Day-Lewis doing his tics and stuff like that. And he did cerebral palsy, passably well as a transformation. It was okay. The problem with that particular piece was the script was shit. But that their energy went into this performance of the transformation, and necessarily there's perhaps more of a nudge and a wink to the audience that this isn't really happening by that transformation. I like transformational acting. I do it myself quite a lot, and the fact we'd have to play myself all the time would be horrifying. I wouldn't be interested in doing that. I try and avoid that at all costs. So the actor's desire to transform is, I think, really, and need to transform, and is absolutely necessary and important. But they do put their energy into that rather than the other stuff, which a disabled person, who, if they were a good actor, wouldn't have to worry about, and they could concentrate on actually telling the story from inside of that character truly and deeply.
I mean, how much preparation goes into transformational acting, and how much should? Because I think it's interesting.
As much as they pay you a wage for.
I'll just give you this kind of interesting, basically like Sia's new film Music, which in some ways, like the one of the major things that went into it was the main character was supposed to be autistic, and they got a non-autistic character person to play that part. It's interesting that if you look at the look at the interviews, how much work she did, it was mostly watching YouTube videos and various stuff and various stuff like that, and watching a film called Gilbert Grape. Now it's interesting what happened. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Now it's interesting that actually in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Leonardo DiCaprio plays an autistic character in that film.
Yeah.
And honestly, he spent a week in a home for autistic children. I mean, that's a very different level of effort.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's a YouTube generation, isn't it, of acting? But even so, I mean, what was it, even in Leonardo, and he's a wonderful actor. And I haven't seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape, so I don't know. I should watch it. What was the process he was doing in that, and was it mimicry? Was he trying to live the understanding? I mean, to get inside an autistic head, is you're not going to achieve that really. What is the process? I don't understand what the process is. And Sia, well, don't get me started on Sia. That's the car crash that has happened.
Yeah.
It's not even waiting, it's happened.
So what would be, so let's say that you were trying to come up with an ideal for kind of that transformational acting.
Well, the ideal would be to spend a good year researching that and doing as some of the well-paid Hollywood actors can do, is they can really work changing their physique and doing the research. I mean, you don't have to live as a character, which many method actors find necessary to their process. Although, do you know this is an old actor's story, but you might not know about Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman on The Marathon Man. Do you know that one? No. Oh, sorry. We've got a 2-year-old coming backwards in the house. So
she's saying hello, is she?
You saying hello? Say hello to everyone. Yeah, it's tragic. Where was I? Yeah, taking a year to transform yourself and work on it. And there's a story of Dustin Hoffman working on The Marathon Man when he was playing. He'd been on a character who had been awake for 3 days and had been on the run and been pursued by this Nazi doctor played by Laurence Olivier, and he was in a terrible state and hadn't slept for days. So look, Dustin Hoffman turns up having slept rough for 3 days, hasn't slept, hasn't eaten, and looks an absolute mess for this scene. And Laurence Olivier says, "My dear boy, why don't you try acting? It's far easier." And I I'm more on Larry's side on that. But just being able to work it, Russian companies, I don't know if they still do, but under the Soviet Union, they were very well financed, although ideologically corrupt. They were often working on a production for 2 or 3 years to get it right. And I'm not sure I'd have the patience. I don't think many British actors would have the patience to go in that process. But the more time you work on it, the more hopefully you get the detail of it. So yeah, that transformation process, so that the physical transformation you no longer have to think about, and then the mental and emotional real work of acting is where you concentrate your energies on.
But I mean, I suppose the next question then is the empathy section.
Mm-hmm.
Is that mostly about identifying the kind of key drives of that individual and kind of embodying those, and why that
you just there's various tools. You say, for an actor, they would say, "What's my objective in a scene?" And they would push to getting that objective, and their whole energy and focus would be, I want to get this woman to sleep with me, or whatever the objective is. And they would play that scene in that way, and all the tactics and strategies they use would be focused in on that objective. And that's the essence of what an actor does. Is actors act, they do action, and that's essentially how it works. My mind has gone. Can you repeat the question again so I can? Is that all right?
That's an answer. Thank you.
That's an answer. Okay.
I wanted to ask you about something slightly different now. I wanted to ask you about disabled actors and the extra barriers they face, because I feel that there's a class thing within acting as well, especially within theatre acting. You know, like non-disabled people, you know, if they're coming from like a very middle class background, they can afford to be unemployed for a bit. And
Bank of mum and dad. Yeah, I mean that goes across all actors. Is the working class thing? It's an doubly so for disabled working class actors as an intersection of that. That's it's very difficult to break into the profession. And for disabled actors, is you've got to, as the difficulties I had getting into drama school, they no doubt still exist. There are now some specialist kind of drama schools for disabled actors. Like I think Grey Eye is about to set up one, which looks great, and those opportunities exist. But then when you get there, let's say you've done the training, and in the training has been relevant to you as a disabled actor and relevant to your body and your impairment, and you come out feeling confident and ready to take on the acting profession with aplomb. What are you going to find there in the theatre sector, and is it going to be welcome to you? And that's possibly the biggest barrier we have now. I think physical access for actors is still an ongoing process, but I think a lot of theatre companies have gone on that journey and understand what a disabled actor would need. And no one in the theatre sector that I know of wants to deliberately put a block on a disabled actor doing work. I don't think they do. There may be some. In fact, yeah, there are some. Definitely there are some. I'm thinking of some now who have a particular aesthetic to protect, but on the whole, you get an open ear and a warm heart, I think. But the problem lies in the attitudinal barriers that people don't even know they're doing half the time about what they think makes good theatre and what they think makes that their assessment of a character and what that character is about, and an assessment. So let's take a cliche, Romeo and Juliet. What does Romeo look like? What does Juliet look like? People have a culturally stereotypical idea of what they might look like, and rarely would that be a disabled person. And if it is, then the whole production will have to morph itself to accommodate that single choice, and it'll have to be relevant to that single choice. For me, the most important thing is actually to write new plays where we don't have to contort a play which was essentially assembled around ideas which will exclude disabled people. And Shakespeare creates a great, a marvelous place for disabled actors to be, but some of those roles in people's minds aren't considered to be disabled. Whereas a new play can just, where's the new Shakespeare? That's a stupid question, but who can really look at our times and who should be represented on our stages and who should be running that story and be the center of that story and do a proper, decent interrogation of that life, and not just, some tokenistic or misguided need to warp a pre-existing play to be relevant to that disabled actor or vice versa. So yeah.
I mean, how much work do you have to go into to make the set and kind of the scenery, and for example, if you have a balcony scene, generally like there would be steps leading up to that, like that yes. I would imagine be just what you would get your carpenters or whoever to do that. How do you avoid that in exposure, and what are the ways around all of that?
Well, Romeo and Juliet we wouldn't do Romeo and Juliet, but because that's not what we do. But yeah, let's take your provocation and run with it. In a production of Romeo and Juliet, you would have to consider. Oh, we've got my daughter's come back again. This is a podcast, by the way. So.
Oh, sorry.
It's no ordinary Zoom. Sorry about that. It's a pandemic. I hope people have heard of that. You would have to consider the access needs of the actors in long before even the design process. That you would have to think about how that would inform the world of your play, and try. And so let's say, we'll have Romeo will have a ramp up the balcony. Well, that doesn't quite work as a block, does it? It's kind of interesting, but you'd have all manner of different types of solutions to it, and that would be discussed actually way back why you're making that piece, and what you want to say about that piece long before even the designer gets to it. And I've seen that process go wrong with disabled actors quite a lot, that they'll think, we'll bring the designer in, and by which point, I didn't realize you wanted captions on stage, and no one had thought to tell the designer that was an absolute requisite of a show, and hence they designed the whole set essentially in an irrelevant way, and they had to go back to the drawing board. I mean, they should have in that particular case, but they didn't.
I mean, I wonder how you'd feel, because I know this somewhat reverses the disability aesthetic, but given the problems that disabled actors have, like there's colorblind kind of producing where you basically pick all the characters without regard to what race they are, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
How would you feel about kind of disability blind. And again, in some ways, I don't like.
It's just, I think it's the time old problem of having a manifesto to try and create a piece of art. And in the ideal, and manifestos and art don't really go together. But in a normal sense, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. So repeat your question again, and I'll think about it.
In terms of an innovation in TV is kind of colorblind casting. That's the phrase I was looking for. Colorblind casting, where basically you just, you have two brothers, and it doesn't matter if one of them is if one of them's black and one of them's white. You just, because they're both really good. Do you think that could work in disability, in theatre around disability? Because I mean, you have someone talks about this.
Well, to answer it simply, no, I don't think it is possible. I don't think colorblind casting exists either. It might be color willful blindness, and then it doesn't, and that's a sort of an erasure of someone's story and experience. And so it's more better to see what's the opportunity in this, rather than what's the how can we all pretend that it's not there. I kind of feel that's the way it's going. But I'm sure there is a theatre space where it would be possible to create a piece where all that didn't matter. But I don't know what that is, because I don't know what the play is, and I don't know the approach. I don't want to sit down and say there's a manifesto that says we should all dig into our diversity in every show we do, because it might just not be what the story is about. And I would absolutely love disabled actors to be cast with less fetishistic focus on our disabilities. So that, okay, so the guy in the benefits office is in a wheelchair, and that might inform the scene, but it's not really, he's just a bloke, and he's there to be a pain in the bum to someone, the protagonist or something like that. There's that, and that should happen a lot more, because otherwise disabled actors won't have sustainable careers. If all we have to do is play our diversity, then you won't be able to have a career. It won't work, because those roles come up very few and far between, and then they're a bit crap anyway when you get them. So
how do you feel about relaxed performances in theatre? Because what I mean is, like, when I've heard about relaxed performances from actors, they feel like they can, these are non-disabled actors, by the way, they feel that they can kind of relax when there's a relaxed performance going on, because they're just disabled people anyway, so you can just go through the motions. What do you feel about relaxed performances?
Okay, so is it just to kind of investigate what you're saying? Are these actors saying that they're coasting it and not putting their effort in?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then they're pillocks, aren't they? And they're not doing their job properly.
Yeah.
And disabled people deserve their full commitment. It will be a different kind of performance, and in a relaxed performance, because actors are used to the hushed reverence of a dark room where we all stare at the stage and don't make a noise and don't go up to the bar or whatever it is. But I mean, take Battersea Arts Centre, which had Jess Toms there for some time, and they every show they try and make a relaxed performance there, and everyone is entitled to be relaxed, and it's a great show. It's a different way. You're more interacting with the audience. It's more live. I think it sounds a bit more exciting. I've never done a relaxed performance in an official theatre sense. I performed in kind of day centres for disabled people and stuff like that, where you got no choice. It's relaxed. It's going to be relaxed, and that's great. And you riff with it, and that's fine. But if the actors are just coasting because they don't think their audience is important, then they're not decent actors, and they don't deserve the job.
Review on it, really.
Yeah, but however, a relaxed performance might make an actor more relaxed in a positive way, possibly. And when your performance is relaxed, you can be a better actor. So there's another take on it, possibly.
And just to finish off, could I just ask you about your vision for your new role that you're going into now?
A vital exposure.
Vital exposure,
yeah. My vision is to carry on the work of Julie Mack in making exciting disabled-led theatre touring the country, hopefully COVID permitting, in around social justice and shining a light on stories we don't know about and have been hidden from us for various reasons. Julie Mack did a lot of stories around queer identity, and she did a lot of stories around the mental health system and things like that, and they were brilliant shows. I want to continue that work and investigating different communities, and hopefully really make work which begins to look beyond just the personal story and make a work that looks at the personal political relationship with the whole of society, and makes. I described, I think, in my initial pitch, I wanted to make a theatre company which would make Brecht proud, and that would really make complex, deeply thought out political theatre with disabled people at the helm of it. Not necessarily only disabled people. I'm friendly. I work with the people, but that's this political interrogation of what we as disabled artists can do. I think can be more than just talking about a disabled experience. It can inform it, absolutely, and will do. But I think we've got bigger stories to tell than just our personal ones. And then my other side of it is to really try and help disabled artists to develop and create a home for disabled artists where they're supported in the long term. And as I described before, isn't the do 'em and dump 'em model, but really tries to join the dots of their career and support them from one opportunity to the next. And I'll be making various projects I'm undergoing now, which will help that with, and also we, not just professional theatre, we'll be doing participatory theatre, and I'll be able to say more about that in detail, but we're looking to create a cohort of disabled journalists, which will kind of community journalists that can go and investigate the disabled perspective of COVID. Because what I don't want to happen is what happened in austerity, where our stories were just the horrendous austerity project and all the death and pain that caused disabled people was erased and ignored by the media. And I just don't want that to happen again for COVID. We need to start screaming and shouting and singing louder about what's happening, because people don't know. And if they knew, I don't think we'd have the government we had. I'd like to think
we
so.
certainly do need to keep screaming and shouting and singing loud as we possibly can. And that's part of the
don't get me
singing.
singing. That wouldn't be pleasant.
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say?
I said, but don't get me singing, because that wouldn't be pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of what we're doing here. Is just
Not
trying
singing,
to get our voices
just
out there.
No singing. Sorry, Shabazz.
Trying to get our voices out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's great what you two are doing. It's really good.
Thank you anyway.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, and it's been awesome chatting with you.
It's been a joy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.